Hello and welcome to another edition of Tribulation Ready Survival. Welcome to part 3 of our canning series. Today we're going to be canning a whole chicken. We're going to see how many pints we can fit a whole chicken into with all the bones removed. And just in case you wondered, my fingers are black because I'm working on another video about black walnuts to come later. So what we have in front of us here is approximately a 5-pound chicken. It's still slightly frozen. You're going to want to make sure you get all the insides. If you get one chicken with the inside still in it, make sure those are removed at some point anyways while you're cooking it or before you cook it. And we are going to place this into our pot. We're also going to make sure that while we're cooking the chicken that we get a good amount of broth, because we're not wasting anything. We don't do that here. We're going to can the broth, we're going to can the chicken, and you can season it to your taste, to your liking. Preferably I would like to have some garlic in it, but we have some people who don't, so I may add that later after when we go to eat it.
We're going to show you too. We have someone sick again in our house. Our oldest daughter works at a daycare and is continually bringing illness. And the whole thing about first-year teachers catching everything, I'm finding to be very true. So we have somebody sick again. So we're going to set aside part of this chicken and broth for them. So it's something to think about. Like when you have sick people, you can go ahead and make it, and it makes so much soup and so much broth. And I'm going to show you how you can even make more broth after you've done the first batch. That it's something good to have on hand, and you can make it, but when you're making it, go ahead and can the rest of it. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so obviously we're putting our chicken in our pot. I'm going to wash my hands real quick.
And as always, especially while dealing with raw meat, sanitation is important. So you may want to have some disinfectant wipes or a nice clean towel and clean washcloth nearby so you can wipe off your surfaces that get soiled.
Okay, I have my bulk poultry seasoning. I'm going to cover where we got it from, but my bulk poultry seasoning, and I'm going to just be pretty generous with this on the chicken. I'm adding some salt and pepper, and I don't think it adds near enough salt or pepper, so I just take the lid off. And then we're going to fill it with water.
And you might notice that there's a noise in the background. We have our jars in the dishwasher. They are getting washed again and heated up so that when it comes time for us to pack the jars, they are ready to go and we don't have to heat them up in the oven.
So other things that we might put in here would be like onion, garlic, and you do it to your taste, what your family likes. This is the base for our chicken soup that we would make anytime somebody's sick, or when we just want chicken soup. So we want to get the water above the chicken. The bones inside the chicken release the good healing properties from the bone marrow that will help your body heal when you're sick. So we used to make this and just put it all in the freezer. And after we learned to can, we're like, this is so much better, because if the electricity goes out, and the freezer is only going to work for so long, but the cans can stay on the shelf for a much longer time.
And when you pull them off, you don't have to cook them. So one thing you might keep in mind was when we had the hamburger, we cooked it till it was crumbly, but it wasn't completely brown. It was cooked, but it wasn't completely brown. In this case, since we're cooking chicken, the chicken has to be cooked completely, all the way through, all the way done. So we will get this cooked. We'll be back to you as soon as the chicken is done cooking completely through, and we'll go through the deboning process. And now our chicken's falling apart, which is a great sign that it is ready for the cooling off process temporarily, enough to take the bones out and separate the bones from the meat. we're going to save both the bones and the meat and the broth because we're going to move on to the next step, which is canning with the broth and the meat. Okay, so I've got one bowl here with my chicken that's falling apart. I've got another one here that I'm going to use for the meat, and then I got another one right here that I'm going to use for the bones. And again, saving everything, using everything, including the broth that's still over in the pan. And so I'm going to go ahead and debone this. We will not be putting any chicken skin in there. The chicken skin is going to go with the bones for the broth to be used later. Okay, so as you can see, I have the meat separated out from the bones. These are bones, meat. That's going to be for some chicken soup we have later. That's not going to be part of this. But this is essentially a whole chicken. I have gone through and taken off all the meat that I can find on the chicken. I went through with a fine-tooth fork. So now we're going to move on to the canning process for the chicken meat. The bones over here are going to be put back in another pot. We're going to boil them back into bone broth. We're going to boil them for several hours and make a whole new set of bone broth to be canned at a later time. Okay, so we're going to fill the jars. We're going to pack it, not smash it, but pack it so it's nice and tight.
We're going to leave headroom in the jars.
So that we can come back and put juices in there, right?
Well, and so that the lid will stay on.
Okay. So what's the headspace that we need for this?
Inch, if I remember correctly.
We'll post it at the top of the screen here. We're still following our instructions here, and we don't have them right offhand, so we'll leave you the gapping space here at the top in just a moment as we fill all the jars. This doesn't take very long. Literally, we've filled 3 jars with all the meat from a whole chicken. 3-pint jars. That's it.
And we do have some meat set aside to make soup, but we didn't even have very much. We don't even have a whole jar over there.
No.
So
maybe 3.5 pints is probably all the meat we got off that chicken. And that was a 5-pound chicken.
So next we're going to put broth. First I'm going to make sure we're at half of.
And we knew we were going to have more broth than chicken, which is why we're going to can the broth also.
Okay.
Okay, filling the jars with broth. This is kind of a messy process. You're going to spill a little bit, so just have your cleaning supplies handy.
So now we're just going to do some jars with broth only, which makes it shelf stable, and then you have broth if you want to add it into a recipe or if somebody gets sick or anything like that.
And it'll can just as long as the chicken does. It's going to be a 3-hour can. We're going to just can it all together. Same time, same pot.
Like Mike said, we don't like to waste anything, especially with the way prices are going. We want to make sure that we take everything we can and use it.
So, just a reminder, these jars have already been cleaned and sterilized. We just pulled them out of the dishwasher before filling them, and they were very hot when they were in there. But we're going to bring them back down to room temperature because we only have one eye on our stove. That's a big one, and it works. So we have to start from warm so the jars do not break. Now, we didn't can all of the broth, and that's because this is what's going to be left over for tonight. with our chicken soup for dinner. And so we will be moving on now to our canning process for these 7 jars of chicken, 1 whole chicken.
So since it has the chicken broth on it, the grease, we need to make sure we get it wiped off, just like the other ones. So we use our vinegar, and we're gonna wipe around the top to get any grease off. Then we flip it and do the other one.
So you don't use the same side on multiple jars.
In fact, I open it and flip it again. So I'll do 1 more paper towel.
Total, we're going to do in this batch 7 jars of chicken. So this is a whole chicken plus a whole bunch of broth that we made to go along with it. And it's kind of a bonus because we're going to can this, maybe eat this a year or so down the line, and we're making dinner all at the same time. So, bonus. And just like in our previous videos with canning, it doesn't matter pints or quarts, we're going to put them on there finger tight, which means they're not wrenched down, they're just on there tight enough to hold the rubber seal onto the jar so that air can escape from the seal, and then the vacuum will pull the rubber down to the glass and seal it airtight during the water bath process.
I'm going to wipe the jars off because we have some grease on the side of them. Not that it matters, it's just going to go in the water, but I want them cleaned off so they're not...
Sanitation is always important. That's right. You don't want grease floating around in your bathing water if you can. If you can. Ha ha ha.
Ha ha ha, you're punny.
Okay, I am punny.
Okay, so here we're putting vinegar in.
Splash of vinegar.
I'm going to go ahead and add a little water before I put them in there.
Notice that we already have our pan protector or jar protector, whatever you want. The rubber protector down there so our jars don't clang and bang and aren't immediately on the source of heat.
And I am putting warmer water because these jars are hot. In fact, I'm going to have to use the jar lifter to put them in because they're hot enough to do that. Like Mike said, if we had eye working, our other eye working, we would just have our water ready to go and have this boiling, but since we don't, we're doing it this way, which is fine.
Just because you got a deficiency somewhere doesn't mean you can't get the job done. So we will persist as long as we possibly can through this minor issue.
So we'll put the water up above the jars.
And we're going to set a separate pan of water on the stove over here that is going to be hot also with a little bit of vinegar in it, because for 3 hours when you boil this, or what boil it, when you can it at a high temperature like that, the water is going to boil off. And so you have to refill it, and you don't want the temperature to go down. So you refill it with hot water to keep that temperature up. And you have to keep refilling the water every now and again. You want to make sure you have a ½ inch or more water over the top of your jars.
One thing I want to say, every video we do, we want to talk about this, you need a rolling boil before you start the processing time. So since we only have the one eye, we've got to start the processing time. It's going to take a little bit of time for this much water to boil. If you have 2 eyes, if you've got a setup where you can go outside and do it, and you can have more than one thing going, you already have it boiling, you can already start the processing time. We have to wait till it gets to a boil to start the time. Thing just will hold the jars down. We're going to put our lid on and turn the eye on. Now when it starts boiling, we'll start a 3-hour processing time to process this.
Okay, so we are now at a rolling boil. At this point, we will start our 3-hour timer and we will check it intermittently to refill the water with this pan that we have over here, and we'll keep refilling this pan into this pan as long as the 3 hours is going.
Now, I also wanted to show you, since we're canning the chicken and vegetable broth, it made me think about the soup that I made the other night. And we had leftovers. We had some for lunch, and then we still had some leftover because I make big pots of soup when I make soup. So I canned almost 2 quarts. You can see there wasn't quite all the way to the top of this quart. But now I have it shelf stable, and it's not just sitting in my fridge hoping someone eats it or me having to throw it out. Or also I put it in the freezer, but this way it's on the shelf, and if electricity goes out, we have it.
Small batch canning, it's a thing. It's been 3 hours. We got a couple of jars already popping. We are removing them with the jar lifters, and we are placing them on our towel here that's on our countertop. You can see this jar is still, both of these jars, all of them are still boiling on the inside, which is just fine. They're very hot. And so what we're going to do is, once we have all the jars pulled out of the water bath, we're going to make sure that they're dry on top. Just a nice little pat, get the rest of the water off. And then we don't want them to cool down really fast and the jars break. So we're going to wrap them up in a nice towel, or you could use a blanket depending on how many cans you got. And from that point, we will let them sit until tomorrow morning for about 12 hours. And at that point, they will be ready to inspect and store.
And right on.
And right on. Okay, so we are now officially done with our canning for this day. One whole chicken doesn't fill up very many pint jars, as you know. It's the broth that takes up more space. So we thank you for spending time with us today and letting us show you how we water bath chicken. If you have any questions or comments, please either leave them down here on the video or go over to our Facebook page, and there will be a link to the video, and you can feel free to get social with everybody there. If you are not a subscriber, I'd ask you to subscribe down here and hit the like button so that we can continue getting videos out to you guys. And with that being said, have a good one.